Professor William Sachs. You know, he did Hindi diploma from Banaras Hindu University in 1978 before joining research here. His BA Honors South Asian Studies University of Washington, Seattle in 1980. BA High Honors Asian Language and Literatures University of Washington, Seattle 1980. MA Anthropology, the University of Chicago, and 1982. This is the Ramnagar Ramlila, a theatre of pilgrimage. Advisors Ralph Nicholas and Chairperson Bernard Cohen R.T. Smith. Under their supervision, he did that work for his MA Anthropology. PhD Anthropology, the University of Chicago, 1987. And his dissertation, Chaya Maya, the Songs and Journeys of Nanda Devi. His advisors were Ralph Nicholas, co-chairperson, and Kim Marriott, co-chairperson, Paul Frederick Wendy Doniger. You know, she is a big scholar. And now he joined as a teaching assignment in the University of Chicago in 1985-86. Is postdoctoral fellow, Harvard Academy for International and Area Studies. He had been there for 2 years, from 1987 to 89. Then he joined as a lecturer in the Department of Anthropology in Harvard University in 1988, and he was there for 1 year. Then senior lecturer in Philosophy and Religious Studies, University of Canterbury. That is in New Zealand, and then professor and head department of anthropology, South Asia Institute in 2000. He is still there. He has been executive director of the South Asia Institute in Heidelberg University, and he is visiting professor at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. He has more than 8 books. Almost all the books were published from reputed publication, Oxford publication, and numerous articles on Nanda Devi, Pandav Leela, Bhairav, healing, and currently he is working on Tantra in South and Southeast Asia. It is a German foundation funded project, and she is also co-researcher here with him, and I am also doing research with him as Indian collaborator. So give him a big hand. Now I'll take the opportunity to introduce Professor Annette Hornbecker. She is first PhD in philosophy from the renowned German Center of Philosophy, but then realized that Western philosophers were not really interested in Asian philosophy. So she shifted and did a second PhD in anthropology. She is currently professor of anthropology at Heidelberg University and specializes in comparative knowledge systems, anthropology of the environment, and Hinduism as a minority religion in Indonesia. And she is also a co-investigator in this project, German funding agency project, which we are currently working on in different parts of India, basically in Himalaya. She is doing research in Bali, basically on the minority Hindus there, what the Tantra is for them, and how the Tantra of Bali differs from the Tantra of India, particularly western part of Himalaya. Is what are these meeting points and what are the differences? So she is doing research there, but this time she has also taken part in the research. Last time also she was here. So this project will go on for 1 more year, I think. Within 2 years, it will be summed up, and then the publication will of course come. So please give a big hand. And, we have our students here, our faculty, few faculty members here. I am very much thankful to my students, especially few senior research scholars, Ekta Singh, our colleague, and Dr. Prem Bahadur and Nagendra Rawat. They are not here this time, and all the students. So you will enjoy his lecture, I hope, and you will also learn a lot. I hope this. So now I don't take much time, and I will request Professor Sax to please start his lecture. Thank you.
हम तो भारत में हैं, तो मैंने सोचा कि उचित है कि सबसे पहले मैं हिंदी में एक दो शब्द बोलूं और प्रोफेसर सकलानी को धन्यवाद, हार्दिक धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूं कि मैं फिर से एक भाषण गढ़वाल यूनिवर्सिटी में दे सकता हूं। कई बार ही तो मेरा 10वां भाषण हो गया होगा आपके हेमवती नंदन बहुगुण गढ़वाल यूनिवर्सिटी में। कुछ साल पहले, 10-15 साल पहले मैं करीब हर साल लेक्चर देता था। अब तो थोड़ा कम हो गया, तो फिर भी जब मुझे मौका मिलता है वापस आने का और लेक्चर देने का, तो मुझे बहुत खुशी होती है, क्योंकि इस यूनिवर्सिटी में मुझे बहुत आई फील वेरी मच एट होम, और आपको बहुत धन्यवाद है कि आप लोग सब आए हैं। बाकी जो इंग्लिश में लेक्चर दूंगा, लेकिन शुरू में कुछ कहना चाहता हूँ। जो करण महाराज एक रवाइन क्षेत्र का देवता से, वो उनका बाजा बजाने वाले जैसे वो उनको पुकारते हैं। जागे सवाल संजा नगर कोट कन्या, राग संजा भोग संजा धन की पूजा, हरि हरिद्वार बद्री केदार गंगा भागीरथी, 5 पांडव 60 कौरव, बड़ा शक्ति परशुराम, सिरी सरज का राजखौर सागरमा, 3 तलाय को राजा, सूरज गा कुंती को जय, सवासन मनस हिनाली गांव, धर्मी राजा राज बढ़े, चतुर्वास बढ़े, सिंहासन को धनी। This is something that's recited every day by the drummers in front of Karna's temple, and I've been working on the parampara of Karna and other deities in Rawain for over 20 years. And finally, I'm writing a book about this topic. Today, my plan was to read you one of the chapters of this book, and since we're in a history department, as an anthropologist, I thought, well, I do have one historical chapter, and I will share that chapter with you. But unfortunately, I had an almost complete breakdown of my computer. I have no access to my notes. Unfortunately, I have no access to my photographs, and that's particularly sad because I have some fantastic photographs from the place. But you get no photographs, you get no chapter. I sort of had to put these remarks together very slowly, and maybe that's a good thing, because I think that informal lectures and spontaneous lectures are often much better. I can talk to you, I can see that you're nodding and smiling and you're understanding me. I can see that if you look a bit puzzled, then maybe I have to explain myself. So maybe it will be a better lecture after all, but I'm sorry that I don't have the photographs. All of this research began with some previous research I had done on the tradition of Pandavas. I've called it in my book, I've called it the Pandav Leela, although actually this is a misnomer since this term is not used, as probably many of you know. In this area, it's sometimes called Ganda, it's sometimes called Sarad, and so forth. But the public performances of Pandav Leela I worked on for some time, and just as I was finishing this work, I heard that there were some areas in Rawain where the Kauravas were worshipped, Karna and Duryodhana. And probably like many of you and many of my colleagues here in Srinagar, I thought, this can't be true. This is impossible. Who would worship the Kauravas? But in fact, I went there in around 1990, 30 years ago. I went to the area for the first time and found that it was true. And one of the first things I found was an entire Patti, a traditional land area, which was ruled by the god Karna from his temple. Now, I want to represent this, because I couldn't make a PowerPoint, I have to draw it for you. but I only have to stand up once or twice to show you this. Okay, we can put this sort of schematically. Oh, it's red. This is good. And the black one. Yeah. So you can imagine that there are different patties here. This is very schematic. This is not a geographical map, but a conceptual map. Upstream, along the Tons River, it's actually the Rupin River, is the party controlled by Duryodhana. And downstream, closer to Mori, is the area controlled by Mahasu. And in the middle is Sintur Patti, which is the party that is controlled by Karna. Actually, they call him Karan, Raja Karan. And they refer to him as a Raja. And this idea that he is a Raja, this is not a metaphor. This is not a symbolic way of talking. They really do think of him as their Raja. And the central area here is called Maji Tok, the Tok that's in the middle. And there's a second kind of division here. So everything, all of the people living upstream here are called Shaki. From 60, these are the Kauravas. And the Kauravas are not 100 as we have in the Sanskrit Mahabharata, but 60. According to local myths, there are 60 Kauravas. These people are called Shaki. Everyone living in this area is a Shaki. And everyone living in the lower area is a Pansha. Or read it in Hindi might be better.
Awesome.
Can I erase?
Yeah. Yeah, it is gone.
Okay. Then oops.
Upper one. Above that. Yes.
Pandavas. So all of the people in the lower part are called Pansya, and the upper people are called Shaki. And in the realm of Karna, it's divided right in half. So the upper part of the Pakti is Shaki, and the lower part is Pansya. And inside this Pakti, at the center is the temple. And I would not want to make this as a hierarchy. I think we have to think of this as a map. There's a map, and at the center of the kingdom is the king, Raja Karan. He's in his temple, and he inside his temple is also Shalya, who was rather not so useful for Karan during the Mahabharata. He was rather betrayed him, but here he works together with him. Shalya is in the temple, Renuka Devi is in the temple, and a lot of local deities are in the temple. So Raja Karan has come here. He has established his kingdom, and he's put the local gods within his temple. And he is represented by a Mali. So every few days, when they want to speak to the god, they do what they call Julana. They recite this particular prayer. They play the tak, a local instrument. It looks like a little hurriki, sort of like but it's a bit smaller than a hurriki. And they recite this. The Mali comes. He is possessed by Karna, This is called Julan, and he speaks. So they regularly speak with Raja Karan through his Mali, or you might call it here, you call it a Baki, but a Baki is usually a person with rather low status. And here, the Mali has a very, very high status. He must be a Nautiyal Brahmin, and he communicates, he speaks with the voice of the god. He settles disputes. Traditionally, he would settle civil cases and criminal cases. He tells people when to plant and when to harvest. He deals with cases of rain, if there's too much rain or too little rain. He blesses newborn children. And in previous times, he conducted war against the enemies. So in all these ways, Karna is very much a Raja, he's a king. He is the most authoritative person in this area. And he does this by regularly speaking through his oracle, the Baki, who there is called a Mali. And this aspect of war is very important because in previous times, up until the early part of the 20th century, there was a great deal of fighting that happened, a lot of feuding between people. These were pastoral groups. They take their sheep and their goats into the high pastures, and people would have disputes over who has access to the grazing rights, who doesn't have access, how much of a fee do you have to pay or not pay. There were other reasons too for fighting, but most of the fights had to do with pastoralism, with goats and sheep and grazing and access and fees for access and so forth. So when there were disputes, the people of these different parties would fight with each other. I'll come back to this point, but it's very important. After the Raja Karan and the Mali comes the Vizier. And the Vizier is responsible for all administrative duties. He is responsible for the temple's resources, its cash, its money. He's responsible for appointing the Mali or dismissing the Mali. He is responsible for choosing the times of the festivals. So all of the economic and administrative tasks associated with this temple. And remember, the temple is like a palace. It's the center of the party. It's a kingdom. It's a very small kingdom, extremely small. Nevertheless, it's a kingdom, and Raja Karan is the king, and he's speaking through his Mali. But this must be administered as well, and so the Vizier is the person who administers all of the day-to-day issues associated with the temple, the finances, the politics, normal disputes and negotiations, and so forth. Below the Vizier is the Pujari, the Brahmin Pujari who worships the god every day. And then two kinds of Rajputs. There are two categories of Rajputs there, Khas and Kund. Now here in Chamoli and most parts of Garhwal and Kumaon, the word Khas is a kind of insult. And people, although they are mostly aware that their ancestors are Khas Brahmin, or Khas Rajputs, or Khas Brahmin, they will usually deny this. They'll say, no, we're not, we are Sorola. But they know it, somehow they know it, but they deny it. Right? So Khas is a kind of insult. There it's the opposite. What we here call Sorola, there they call Khas. They say we are the Khas Rajputs. Khas means Khas, we are Khas. And so you have, just as in Garhwal and Kumaon, you have two sections of Rajputs, but the higher section are called Khas. And the lower section are called Kund. So the Kund are the ones who used to have these battles over pastoral grazing rights. They are the ones, Kund इसलिए कहते हैं कि अपनी खून बहाने के लिए तैयार है और उनकी खून भी बड़े खुशी से उनके खून भी बहाएंगे. So they are called Kund, and these are the lower castes of Rajputs. So the Khas Rajputs, the higher ones, provide materials for the worship, wheat and ghee and butter and milk and so forth. The Kund Rajputs were the warriors in recent times. There is a local caste of Nats. So the Nats are messengers and they fill the hookah when the men meet in the panchayat. And the lowest castes provide wood for the fire. So just as the great Indian anthropologist M.N. Srinivas said, in India, you never see the caste system in real life because the potter is driving a taxi, the barber is running a shop, the Brahmin has a farm, and so forth. So these things don't really match up. The only place. as M.N. Srinagar said, the only place you really see the caste system in its entirety is at the temple festival. The temple festival, the barber cuts the hair, the potter makes the pots, the Mali brings the flowers, and so forth. So only there. Here too, in the organization of the temple, the caste duties, that is the ideal picture of the society, is realized in the temple ritual. Now there are several points that I want to make about this system, this divine kingdom, as I call it, in Rawain. First of all, this kind of system existed everywhere throughout the region in the pre-colonial times. And if I had my slides, if I had my materials with me, I would have begun by showing you a picture of the Shimla Hill States. If you look at the Shimla Hill States, you see they're tiny. They're tiny, tiny little, you can call them kakurais, the Shimla Hill States. In fact, all of these hill states, all of them had this kind of organization with a god at the center, a god in his temple, who spoke through his oracle, the Mali, the Baki, if you will, to administer the city, the kingdom, the vizier who ran the day-to-day affairs of the kingdom, and so forth. And some people say, no, this cannot be, it's not true. But every historian, without exception, who has studied this area would agree with me. There's no controversy about this. The most eminent one is Singh, Chetan Singh, in his recent book on Nehemiah. He says exactly that thing. And I was trying to remember what's his student's name. He wrote a book a few years ago called Becoming Indian, which is about the advent of the colonists in Shimla and so forth. Anyway, I don't have time. I can go into the various theories about how this system developed. But the first point I want to make is simply that this particular kind of system existed everywhere throughout the region. Even now, during Kulu Dasera, the point is that at the center of the political formation is the royal god. So, for example, in Kulu Dasera, the Raja of Kulu, still, until today, is possessed briefly by its family goddess and speaks to her name. Similarly for Rampur with Bhadrakali, and for Mandi, where the actual legal sovereign is the form of Vishnu. I don't have my notes. Raghunath. And the Murti was brought from the plains in the 17th or 18th century, and established in the kingdom. So the legal sovereign is the Murti, and the king of the Mandika Raja is his representative. In Kulu, the king is officially the king, but in certain points, he speaks with the voice of his lineage deity. And I give you other examples. Sometimes the king is a Murti, sometimes it's a human being, sometimes it's, in this case, also a Murti speaking through his Mali. The point is that at the center of the political formation is the Devata, or the deity, maybe the lineage deity or the national deity. And in the chapter, which I was not able to find this morning, I go through all of Indian history and try to show you many examples of this, not only from India, but from Sri Lanka, from Nepal, and also from South and Southeast Asia, to make the point that this was the standard situation for classical Hindu kingships. Hindu kings were always at least partly divine. They were never purely secular. They always had some kind of a divine or godly aspect. You see this in the iconography of Rama. Vishnu is always represented as a king. Rama is the ideal king, and they're substantially part of Rama. Because if you remember the birth of Rama, Dasharatha does a sacrifice, and he gets the prasad from the sacrifice. He distributes it amongst his queens. So Rama gets 50%, the twins get it's 25, 50%, 25%, and then 12.5% each. So 1/2 for him, 1/4 for Bharata, and then 1/8 for Nakul, for Lakshman, and Shatrughan. So they each, it's physically, they've gotten the divine prasad, and their very bodies are holy. So they are not entirely human, not entirely divine, but a kind of mix. And my point is, if you look, again, the chapter that I couldn't bring, if you look at the royal inauguration ceremony, the Raja Abhisheka. You see how there's a technology here, a Vedic technology, a Vedic ritual. You bring all of the waters from the kingdom, you bring soil from various parts of the kingdom, you bring plants, soil, all of these things. You lustrate the king with these waters, you use the soil in various ways, and you join him with his kingdom physically, not symbolically. This is the important thing. It's not a symbol. It's not an idea. It's a physical, substantial union of the king with his kingdom, and you make him divine through this ritual. So you can see the ritual almost as a kind of technology. So that's the first point, is that this system of divine kingship was everywhere in that part of the Himalayas for a very long time. Secondly, that the idea of a divine kingship is not at all unusual. It's rather the typical form for Hindu kingship throughout history. The third point that I would want to make is that this idea contradicts many of our categories when we talk about religion and politics. We have the idea that religion and politics should be separate. That's why the Indian constitution, India is created as a secular society, with the idea that we must keep religion and politics separate. And this is a thoroughly modern, post-Enlightenment, rational idea. We want to keep religion out of the public, or out of politics as much as possible. And religion and politics should be regarded as separate things. The most famous one to advocate this point of view with respect to India, in my discipline of anthropology, was Louis Dumont. And Louis Dumont was the great anthropologist, but also seemingly a rather sophisticated Indologist, Sanskrit scholar. So amongst Europeans, in Western scholarship in the 60s, 70s, 80s, Dumont was the most important figure for the understanding of Indian society, particularly the caste system, but also traditional politics. And Dumont argued that in classical India, there was a separation between religion and politics, and this separation happened at a very early time. In his view, in Dumont's view, the caste system itself is based on the principle of purity and impurity. So the Brahmin has a monopoly on purity, and the Raja has a monopoly on force or violence. And these two are quite separate. They should be kept separate, and the Brahmin ranks above the king because of this notion of purity. And so what Dumont says in his books is that the Indians, classical Indian civilization, separated religion and politics at a very early period. That for classical Indian civilization, the kingship was purely secular, and the religious sphere was monopolized by the Brahmin. I think he's completely wrong. I think this is a wrong theory. I think Indian politics, religion and politics were always mixed together. When Dumont says this, I disagree completely, but I won't go into details. I don't have so much time, and perhaps you might get a bit bored by that. Let me just say that this theory, this idea that classical Indian civilization distinguishes radically between religion and politics, this idea was very popular. It affected many scholars. Much scholarship in India as well as in the West begins with this assumption, and I say it's wrong. And we know that it's wrong because we can show that Hindu kings always had a divine element. They always had a religious aspect. We never distinguished so radically between religion and politics. This kind of idea is often, I find it even in my friend and colleague Chetan Singh. So on the one hand, he writes that this system of divine kingship existed in Shimla, Rawain, somewhere around the Satluj and Tons rivers for a very long time. Yes, that's good. I'm happy that he's supporting my argument. But he also says something that I think is quite wrong. He says, clearly, the reigning Rajputs realized that they could use religion for their purposes. They could use people's religious beliefs to support their own political system. And therefore, they manipulated religious ideas in order to increase their power. I think so. again, now he's bringing this distinction between religion and politics back. He's saying, oh, those Rajputs, those kings, they were very clever. They were able to manipulate the religious sentiments of the people to achieve their political ends. And I disagree again. I think the kings were also part of this system. Why should we think that everyone in the kingdom accepts this religious cosmology, except the king? What evidence do we have that the king saw the world as a modern secular rationalist would say it? No. The kings of Mandi and the kings of Kulu in the 15th and 16th century, they were not modern secular rationalists. They were classical Hindu kings. They probably felt themselves to be partly divine. They were part of this cultural, ideological, religious system. So when people talk about using religion instrumentally to achieve the goals of the ruling class, that may happen in the modern period, but I don't think it did in the traditional period. I think instead we have a system where religion and politics are thoroughly mixed up with each other. Now there's another way of looking at this problem. Let's go back, let's leave Dumont, let's leave the European theories, let's leave all of this Western sociological discourse and focus on the Indian theories. And after all, I'm an anthropologist, and that's what we try to do. We see ourselves in the discipline of anthropology. Our task is to understand how people see the world. What are their categories? What are their practices? How do they talk about the world? How do they deal with it? We want to see things from the inside. That's why anthropologists spend many years studying with the people about whom they write, so that they can see things from the inside. So forget Marx, forget Weber, forget Durkheim, forget Dumont. These are all European categories being enforced upon the Indian material. Let's ask, how do the Indians see it? And if you ask how Indians see this thing, I think you have to start with Kautilya. And unfortunately, again, the chapter is gone. I have many pages about Kautilya, and I try to organize my books in terms of the Saptam, the 7 arms of the kingdom. Puri. Anyway, what he talks about is the people and the land. But the people and the land are often collapsed into the term Janapada. And I think even in the classical literature, when you talk about the kingdom itself, you talk about the Janapada. And this is land and people. The land and people are not distinguished. It's a single unit. And what we see here is that there is no dualism here of people and environment. So if the king is reigning his kingdom and thinking about the well-being of the kingdom, he's thinking about, or at least Kautilya is making a theory about, Janapada. And Janapada is the Jana as well as the Pada, the land itself. So land and people are a unit, and their unity is the source of prosperity, well-being, and morality. Dharma, and let's forget the word religion too. Religion will confuse us here. What we're talking about is dharma. And I can give you some examples from my field work. Rainmaking. This is how my book begins. A great deal of rain was happening. There was too much rain. The farmers were suffering. Their crops were being destroyed because there was an excess of rain. So everyone came to the temple. They said this chant, which I read to you at the beginning. They played the drums. They called the Mali. The Mali went into trance. Before he goes into trance, he takes off his shirt. He changes his janeo to the other side because he's as Karan. This gets too complicated. Karan is thought of here as a yogi, but we won't go into that. That's too complicated. In any case, he goes into trance, and he says, "What's the problem?" And they say, "People are dying. Everyone, there's too much rain. The crops will be ruined. The poor are suffering. Please, Raja Karan, help us." And his answer to these says, the reason there's too much rain is that you are fighting amongst yourselves. You're fighting amongst yourselves. You haven't solved your problems, and that's why it's raining. It's your problem. You have a moral problem because of your internal disputes. And the rain will stop only when you solve your internal dispute. Okay, he says, I'll stop it for a day or so. I'll stop it for 2 days, but you must meet. You must meet each other. You must settle your problems. And unless you settle your problems, the rain will never stop and you'll all starve. Bye-bye. Namaskar. मैं फिर अपने ध्यान में जाऊँ, मुझे आपकी बातों में मेरे कोई इंटरेस्ट नहीं है, मैं तो ध्यान में वापस जाऊंगा और अपने जो झगड़ा है उसका समझौता या तो समझौता करो या तो मर जाएंगे सब. Took me like, sorry, and he goes back. And this is typical, this kind of, and I start the book with this because this scene is very typical. That one of the highest moral imperatives here is that the people should be united, and the God is always working to unite the people. I will have a chapter on my friend Rajmohan. Dinesh knows him. Dinesh is, so does Professor Hornbacher. They both stayed at his house, and he's the vizier of Karna. I will write a chapter about him, and in this chapter I will portray him as somebody whose entire life was spent trying to bring people together. He's always trying to bring people together within the party. He's happy to fight those people from the other party, but within the party, he wants to bring them together. He's singing, he's talking, he's drinking quite a lot, trying to organize a samjhauta, compromise between the warring parties. And in this sense, he's like the God. He and the God are working hand in hand. When people bring their disputes to the God, they will do this thing, the Chulana. They call him, he falls in trance. He said, why are you disturbing my meditation? And they tell him the problem. He says, you haven't solved your problem yet. You must give me a goat, and you must give me a goat, and now leave me alone, go back, solve your problems, come back to me when the problem is solved. And this is my trick, how does this whole system work? It works because the God, if the people are fighting, he will say nothing, or he'll give them a fine. He will fine them for bothering him. He actually only pronounces the solution when the people themselves have reached the solution. This is my basic argument. The authority of the God is there to confirm the decisions that the people already make. And if they're fighting with each other, if they've not reached a decision, then he will tell them to go and discuss amongst themselves. They should have a panchayat, they should find a kind of compromise, and they please come back to me only when you solve your problem. And so this system, the archaic political system of Rawain, works in this way. The God is there to encourage and push people to solve their problems internally. He has various ways. He punishes them if they're fighting. He might afflict them with sickness or whatever, or he tells them they must pay him a goat or some money or whatever it is. And so the whole system is working to push people towards a kind of unity. And so the system works as is internally consistent. I want to give one final illustration of how this works. Now, I wasn't able to even finish writing my lecture. Now I've run out of the notes that I took. Let me give you one further example of how this works. We'll have time for discussion.
Yeah.
There's two stories. One is a legend and one is a memory. And according to the legend, that is in historical time, go back. Mahasayu, as you may know, is not one god, but four brothers. And one of the four brothers, the most powerful of the four brothers, is Chalda Mahasayu. So the famous story, one day Chalda Mahasayu thought that he would invade the land of Karan and take over the Ord. There's a valley there called Ord. And he wanted to go into Ord and take over this country. And this happens in the local area. You may be aware the gods are put on their dolis. They're carried around constantly on their dolis. They patrol the borders of their kingdom. But sometimes they may try to invade and snatch some of the other gods' territory for themselves. So in this case, Mahasu decided he was going to do it in Ord. And when he showed up with he had 12 big silver poles and lots of people following, a huge entourage, because Mahasu is a great king. And the people there said, oh my gosh, what can we do? How can we take care of this king? We can feed him and his entourage for a day or 2 days, but if he stays for very long, we will be completely poor. We don't have enough food to feed him. We better go fetch Raja Karan. So a man runs to Raja Karan's temple and says, Raja Karan, Mahasu is invading your temple. Come with me, please. So Karan goes to Or and confronts Mahasu. On the one hand, you have the big King Mahasu, 12 silver bowls, all of his followers, big drums. And on the other hand, you have Karan. He's a jogi. He has nothing. He's very poor. He gives away his food. And it's true. Actually, when Mahasu goes from village to village, he demands food from people. And he demands all kinds of rice and grain and milk and things. When Raja Karan goes, he doesn't demand anything. He gives things away. So he's the Dani Raja, right? So he confronts, Mahasu is there, camped out in the field, but he cannot go into anyone's house because he's an outsider. Whereas Raja Karan is the Raja, he goes straight into one of his devotees' houses and stays there. And now he has to confront Raja Mahasu, Chalda Mahasu. How will he do that? And so the first thing he does is he asks the Chalda Mahasu to play his 12 silver bowls. But through his yogic maya, he puts some ghosts in the bowls. They're too heavy. And they can't even lift them, so nobody can play. All of these bowls cannot be played. But Raja Karan calls his dhaki. He plays the dhak. And the women in the field begin to dance. And the wheat, what do you call it? The sheath of wheat, right? They cut the wheat and they put it in the bundle. What do you call it? A sheath. You cut down the wheat and you tie. There's bundles of wheat.
Yeah, that is straw.
Yeah, bundles of wheat lying in the fields. They begin to dance too. And Chalda said, "What kind of a jogi, jadu wala devta are you? It's one thing to make the women dance, but you made the wheat dance. That's really something." And Raja Karan says, "No matter, I am a king and you are a king. We'll just see who's the most powerful. No winners or losers. You show your power, I'll show my power." And then the next thing they did was, they said, Chalda Mahasu said, "Let's see who has the most gold." And Raja Karan had, Chalda Mahasu had bags and bags full of gold. He was very, very rich, like a king. Raja Karan had nothing. He's a jogi. So he said, "How can I have more gold than this Chalda?" So he sent his workers down to the village. I'm sure many of you have heard some version of this story before. Two of the Kund brought up big, heavy sacks of sand. He told them to winnow it with a soup. And as the sand fluttered down to the earth, it turned out to be gold. And now Karan had more gold than Mahasu. And Mahasu could see that he was losing. So he said, "All right, one last test. We take this to Sonar in Uttarakashi, and we see whose gold is real. Whoever gold is real, he will win the battle." Raja Karan said, "That's fine. You are a king. I am also a king. No winners, no losers. We'll just see who's more powerful." 12 people went to Uttarakashi that day, and 12 came back. 6 of them were happy, and 6 of them were defeated. Because when they tested the gold, Mahasu's gold came out black as iron. But Chalda's gold, Karan's gold was pure. And so Mahasu had to retreat. But as he was leaving, Karan said to him, "Look, you are a king. I am also a king. I'm sorry that you lost this battle, but I want to give you a parting gift. Like we give a pitai to the guest who leaves, I want to give you pitai." And the pitai is that the people in the village out, Karsali, the village along the road, you drive through it. I will never enter their village. They will give all of their crops to you, paint to you every year, and they are responsible for the incense of your worship. And it's true. Even until today, right in the middle of the highway, or right in the middle of Karna's Patti, there is a small village which is dedicated to Mahasu. So that's the song that is told, that's the legend that is told. And it shows you many of the things that I did not have time to speak about. The idea that Karan is a jogi, that he has no property, that actually his power comes from his yogic magic, his maya. But it shows you many aspects of him. But there's also a historical thing that happened not so long ago, about 15 years ago, within living memory, and that is this. that the people from Mahasu, they have a traditional practice where they would visit villages up in this part of the area. So this is another patti. This is patti Fateh Parvat.
Yes, yes.
Patti Fateh Parvat, which people locally just usually call Parvat. And Mahasu, when he goes, he's not allowed to go into Karn's realm anymore. People will follow this. Everyone knows this story. They respect it. Say, okay, Mahasu may no longer enter Singtur Patti. But he has some followers up here in Fateh Parvat. And the only way they can reach it is the river going down. Here's the Tons River. Is to climb up here and walk along the cliffs. Very, very dangerous. People would fall into the cliffs. It would be sort of deadly for them. And so about 15 years ago, they said, hey, this is modern India. We are taxpayers. There's a road that goes right through here. We are taxpayers. Who can stop us from taking this road? We will take the road. And so they marched along the road, breaking the old rule. They went along here, and they found their followers up in Fateh Parvat. But now they're stuck because, of course, they did it at night. Actually, they did it at night so that nobody would see them, because they know that if they were caught, that there would be sort of halla gulla, maramari. And so now they're up here in this village, but the people, Karna's people, are very well able to cut off their retreat, so they're stuck. And now Karna, sitting through his Mali, he makes a special set of rice, sends it up to them. Anyway, he caused the son of the Bandari of Mahasu to go mad.
जो करण महाराज का उन्होंने बताया आगे तो सर करण महाराज के बारे में आगे तो सर उन्होंने बताया
तो सही है।
हाँ जी सर दानवीर है, मतलब उनके यहाँ जो भी जाता है मतलब काफी अच्छे से मतलब वो बता देते हैं और सच्चाई वगैरह जो सही है सर।
और किसी को कुछ डिस्कशन करना है तो इसीलिए थोड़ा है।
कोई बात समझ नहीं आई
Is it real or only a legend?
Is it real?
Or a legend? All these stories.
महाभारत
What do you think?
ये कह रहे हैं कि ये is it true that there is just there or
अगर it is legendary और मतलब
ये कह रहे हैं कि ये स्टोरी है या हकीकत में है या मिथ है क्या है?
जो स्टोरी मैंने बताया चांद और
All these stories.
वो मैं तो उसको सही मानता हूँ। ये कहना कि आपकी केटी शिवानंद प्रसाद नौटिया एक पुस्तक में उन्होंने भी उस क्षेत्र का उल्लेख किया और कहा कि महाभारत में लिखा है पुराने समय में कि कर्ण और दुर्योधना इन घाटियों में भाग गए। ये इन लोगों की मान्यता है। मतलब आप पूछेंगे कि आप कर्ण दुर्योधन क्यों पूछते हैं, तो कहीं हमारे पूर्व में और शिवानंद नौटिया ने लिखा कहीं कि महाभारत में भी एक लिखा है कि इन लोगों ने माने दुर्योधन ने इन घाटों में भागा। मैंने इस साइटेशन को कभी नहीं मिला, मैंने खोजा भी, पर ये उनकी मान्यता है, इसलिए वो मानते हैं कि उनकी पूर्वज।
So they have no influence on the Duryodhan's area. I mean the Karna and Mahasu.
Their influence is very much limited to their
To
country,
their own.
with the exception of Mahasu. Mahasu is, of course, the biggest of all of these gods, with a very large area. I wasn't able to speak too much about this, but my PhD student Lokesh Ori has recently published a book in India about it. And there you find when the British, after the 1803, when the British defeated the Gurkhas and reinstalled the King of Garhwal, the first resident in Dehradun was Captain Young. And Captain Young learned pretty soon that when he was making settlements with hill Rajas, he had to do one with Mahasu. So he rode his horse, and he actually went to Hanoi, and he interacted with the Devata over a period of several days. And the British government recognized Mahasu as the local king. So I always think this is very important that the colonial government recognized Devata as a ruler. This seems to be extremely important. So Mahasu is the exception. It's a very large area. District Shimla used to be called Mahasu district. And the Mahasu cult extends very much. This is a whole other topic. Why Mahasu? He's quite an imperialist now. He spreads very rapidly, and he's quite he's rather a dictator, very demanding, but very. So he has a huge area, but all of these other ones are limited to their place. Garhwal is a BC समाज तो BJP आगे सब
उनके आधार पे भी क्या प्रभाव करते हैं क्या देवता क्षेत्रीय देवता
लोकल
पॉलिटिक्स को प्रभावित करते हैं
प्रभावित नहीं करते लेकिन जो भी उम्मीदवार हैं तो भी लड़ रहे हैं तो जरूर कार्यक्रम अंदर मिल जाएंगे कांग्रेस पार्टी और बीजेपी और किसी पार्टी सबको जाना पड़ेगा और सबको देवता का आशीर्वाद अगर कोई ना जाए और किसी को आशीर्वाद ना मिले तो उसका वोट नहीं मिलेगा लेकिन डायरेक्टली वो दे दो माँ सबसे बड़ा है और सबसे शक्तिमान है इसलिए उनको भी गौरव है वो क्या कहना है कि हाँ हमने महासु को भी रोक दिया even though he's so
ये जो दुर्योधन वाला इलाका है ये कारण से और उससे इनका कन्फ्रंटेशन कारण से बहुत बड़ी दुर्योधन
ये पकड़ों का
ये तो दोस्त से
महाभारत में दोस्त थे इस इलाके में दोस्त इस इलाके में तो लड़ते करते
And I have heard that now Duryodhan is worshipped as Someshwar instead of.
Yes, this is another. This will have its own chapter, and it goes like this: when you speak to other people in the area, they will always say how that they worship Duryodhan. The people in that region, especially in the village of Jakhol, but also Oshla and some of the other ones, they say, no, it's not. Well, I've been doing this for a long time. 20 years ago, there were two parties, and the one party said it's Duryodhana, the other one said it's. And when the Mali is possessed, it's very interesting. He stands up and he leans on the crest, says, it's as if his legs were broken. Duryodhana के और जब वो माली खड़े होके बोलता है, तो वो खड़ा नहीं हो सकता है क्योंकि उनकी टांग तोड़े। जैसे दर्द लग रहा है किसी को। तो मुझे इतना काम नहीं लगा पहली बार जब मैंने उसको देखा। तो सचमुच दुर्योधन लेकिन मेरी ख्याल है कि जो जागरियों की गीतों में जो गाया जाते हैं वो सच है बाकी सब झूठ नहीं है लेकिन आप अगर ऐतिहासिक तत्व पे पहुंचना चाहते हैं इन चीजों में तो जागरों का is the main source and in the Jagar there is no mention of Duryodhana nothing it is Someshwar. And this, he's every bit as fearsome as Duryodhana is. He's not a nice devata at all, but he's a pastoral devata, and he's spread through the whole area. I know Professor Saklani has also been to one of these other famous Gangi temple. In Gangi, there are yeah, they call Samosa.
इसलिए स्टार्च छोड़ना
छोड़िए
एक्चुअली सोमेश्वर नहीं है
ये
वो उसको समोसा ही कहते हैं समोसा या समोसा
transformation of
दैट इज द रियल
transformation towards greater culture.
सुमासुलु तावले से सुसुलु
ना ना
Greater culture and
सुधन नाम
नहीं नहीं वो
Greater
ट्रेडिशन
tradition.
कहते हैं वही है वहाँ सुनी है
तो मेरा कंक्लूजन ये है कि वो देवता
समोसा कहते हैं
सोमेश्वर है, हमें सोमेश्वर हमेशा था। तो ये प्रश्न उठता है कि दुर्योधन क्यों बोलते हैं? And what I did was I found a book written by a very high-ranking official in Uttar Pradesh in the late 40s or 50s. I forget. I have it in my notes somewhere. It was very
आपस में बातें नहीं
he wrote a book in English, and he said it was Duryodhan. My feeling is the people from outside, they said, look at these Pahadis, they're so backward, they're so uncivilized, they're so dirty. Here's Karna, the next one must be Duryodhan. It was outsiders, I think, who said this about Someshwar, he said it was Duryodhana. And this very high-ranking official in a book in English in the early 50s wrote the same thing. And I think people accepted this, what the outsiders were saying, that there is nothing in the Javis about it. But these funny things, the Mali, if you look on the old temple in Jaipur, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it said on the side, it was carved in wood, Harijun Durijodhan. Carved, you can see it in Devanagari. Now they've covered that up. They plastered it over because they want to deny, they're trying to transform the god into Someshwar. But I think he always was Someshwar. It's a puzzling thing, this view. But I go with the Javanese, and in the Javanese there's not a word of this, nothing. He's Ratacholi. Ratacholi, he's the one who wears the red choli. Ratacholi.
और कुछ किसी को बात कर लीजिए
So we have an interesting talk here, and particularly this gives a very big message in two ways. One, as he told about Kautilya, राजधर्म, राजा का धर्म क्या है? पूजा पाठ करना नहीं, प्रजा हिते हितम राजा, प्रजा सुखी सुखम राजा. The welfare of public is the welfare of king, and the goodness of public is the goodness of king. That is the dharma. That is dharma. Dharma does not mean religion. Not at all. He later on himself explained that this religion is not okay for in these terms. And the second thing is that you see how the rules, regulations are framed on the basis of traditions, and how much effective and powerful is the language of ethics, values, and the traditions. That is very much effective. The most important thing you should learn about research, that how to use sources. He has used the same sources which are there, but how to use them, he knows that. That's why he is making research. And these sources are around you, but you don't know how to use. This is the difference, and this you must learn. My purpose was this, and you were generous enough to accept my request that you should be here. As he told that he has been friendly to this area for a long time and delivering lectures occasionally. And once he was to say that it was the usual practice for him to deliver lecture every time he is in India. Now he is just last year he also gave us short arrangement. This time, fortunately, good arrangement here. And this will be very important for you to consider and to think how to do research, how to understand tradition, how to do sources. This is very much important. If you don't know in details, that's why you don't know. But the techniques of research, the research cannot be in the sky, in the research. And whatever is prevailing around us has not come up only in a moment.
But it took a long time to develop this society, to generate these things, and it developed on early time, and it is still evolving. With this comment, I invite Ekta to formally thank our speakers.